So if one Zone of the Enders review wasn't enough, it's time for part 2. Well, as in, the sequel to the game. Granted, this one will probably be shorter than the previous one, because a good portion of the game is for some reason really similar to the original, but there are enough differences for me to actually go into some detail for it. And since it was played for me again, I figured what the hell, why not do these games as a back-to-back deal? Lucky you. Zone of the Enders, the second runner, from here on out to be called Zone of the Enders 2, takes place a few years after the final events of the first game. You play as a guy bearing the name of Dingo, who chanced upon finding Jehudi buried on Jupiter during a mining expedition. Having a failed LEV mech, Dingo hops inside Jehudi and finds Ada still works perfectly fine after all this time. You do later find out that Leo hid the orbital frame there, and did the previous job himself to save Jehudi. This plot actually gets touched on a few times during the game, but I won't go too far into it. Just know that Dingo takes the mech, gets recruited by the evil Bomb faction, and dies. Seriously, he dies. But is brought back to life by a girl confusingly named Ken that wants to kill one of the leaders of the Bomb named Noman. This guy is so evil he literally threw away one of his units because they failed their mission. In any case, Noman is the guy piloting the evil Anubis orbital frame, and you'll face off against him multiple times in some pretty epic battles. Hope you like getting your ass kicked. In any case, instead of going on and on about the story, let's talk about the game. But first, yes, the game is similar to the previous in that there's quite a few cutscenes, but things are actually done a bit differently this time around. Instead of your standard animations, Konami opted with actual anime scenes. Given the art direction of the game itself, these don't feel out of place. I'm not a huge anime fan, but I didn't mind these scenes because they really didn't come off as that bad. The anime art style doesn't stop at the cutscenes. Much of the dirt and snow effects that you see have the same visual style as well, but it actually looks top-notch in practice. While I'm going on about the visuals, not much has changed in terms of graphics. Actually, I would go on a limb and say that the environment's actually decreased in regards to quality. Much of the time is spent in underground caverns and on the surface of Mars. So you're stuck with either bland grays, with a few lights, or barren red dirt. However, where the game loses a bit in the stages, it gains in the details of the ships and special effects. The orbital frames look just as good, if not better, than the original counterparts in the original Zone of the Enders. The best part is actually the special effects. The sub-weapons look even better, especially the Vulcan cannon that you get access to. My favorite parts are definitely either the dirt effects that I previously mentioned, or the destruction of the enemy ships. When they blow up, they explode into several blazing fragments. Very cool. The controls are similar to the first game. You still have access to everything we had originally, so the sword, guns, and sub-weapons are all back. In addition, you get extra commands mapped to the L3 and R3 buttons. When Ada is telling you what's going on, you can actually respond to her to give her feedback. Pressing L3 will give a positive response, and R3 a negative. So why would you want to do this? Well, for one, getting Ada to respect you enough will have a slight impact in battle. The only noticeable one is when she recommends weapons to use against every enemy, she can automatically switch it for you. This may not seem big, but it's awfully convenient for Ada to swap to the stronger weapon instead of having to do it yourself while dodging enemy mosquitoes. That's just a slight bonus. Speaking of combat, it's just as fluid as the original, but possibly even better. The camera is improved as well, and it can usually keep up a bit easier. This time the problem really seems to be the special effects. When there's a lot of crap happening on the screen at once, you might be blinded in the fog of battle. Again, the auto lock is helpful in preventing any kind of major disaster in this case, and even if you are blinded, it's only for a second, but it can still be frustrating when you can't see what the hell you're doing. Zone of the Enders 2 doesn't copy everything from its predecessor though. For one, it's a bit longer of a game, but it's also much more linear. The game completely ditches the map, so you go from one area to another without any sort of detraction. Because of this, there's no hunting around for programs or passwords. Most of your sub-weapons are obtained by defeating bosses. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I actually like the first game's methods of checking out different areas. Granted, the first game also takes place over the colonies of Mars, whereas the sequel is more underground in labs. Because of this, the environments in Zone of the Enders 2 also don't get destroyed nearly as well. There's rarely any sort of buildings that you can destroy, other than possibly one level where you need to prevent a faction from leveling a town while battling spider drones. Other than that, levels are relatively tame. This is a bit disappointing, although I can see the reasoning behind it, due to the fact that you're fighting in different areas of the planet. Another thing is that the HUD is cleaned up a bit from its prequel. You only see the weapon you have selected, the radar, your life bar, and special bar. That's it, and it's welcomed. The old HUD wasn't too bad, but it did feel a bit cluttered at times. Instead, this time your experience bar and level are hidden on the start menu. The game does tell you when you level up this time around, and the life bonuses are much more evident, as the meter physically gets larger. This game is also a bit more difficult, but more during the boss battles. This is because the bosses actually require a bit of thought and reflexes. In the first game, you can normally get by just by dashing, shooting the homing lasers, and using your long-range blast attack. This time though, not so much. You often need to use the environment to block or attack, or figure out when the opponent is open for a counter. This is especially the case when fighting Anubis and Nephthym. Using your brain isn't just restricted to the boss battles. One of the final battles requires you to face off against hundreds of mechs, all while protecting yourself and about 40 LEDs. This one feels like you're playing a Dynasty Warriors game, and is completely chaotic. It's probably the hardest point of the game, but definitely one of the most fun. The best part is that there's never really any slowdown, so why don't we have more of these battles? Now we move on to one more level, the minefield. Basically, in order to attack Anubis, Dingo wants to install a super powerful program into Tahuti, but in order to do so, he needs to find a scientist that's hiding in a minefield. In order to find this hideout, you need to carefully navigate the land while being instructed by your partner Ken. One wrong move and the ground explodes a bit. Too many hits and you're down. Ken attempts to navigate you, but there gets to be a point where it really feels like you're walking in circles. My other question is, why not just fly over the whole damn thing? Are these abandoned armaments really going to notice? And how good is Ken's navigation? There was a point where she said, okay, move forward, only to be blown up by a mine. Yeah, that's cool. Zone of the Enders 2 feels so much better than the predecessor, and that's really saying something. It's about an hour or two longer, has a bit better graphics and music, and is much more challenging. Sure, it has its annoying parts like that damn minefield, but overall, it's even more fun than the original. Now, if only Konami would make a third game and make it a trilogy, oh, how we can only wish. Final score? 9 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.